multi-tenant from the get-go. You should have a reason not to be multi-tenant. It shouldn't be, oh, well, I'm going to be single tenant and then I'll figure it out. It's, be multi-tenant from the get-go, or have a very good reason, like, I don't know, medical.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the SaaS Developer channel, where we learn from each other how to build SaaS. And with me today, I have Jeffery Sherman, who a fantastic staff engineer helping SaaS companies build highly performant, more scalable systems. And I want to tell the story of how he got here. So Jeffery and I met through the SaaS community. I've never seen him before. And the moment he joined the community, Jeffery was just so helpful. He shared ideas in his blog that I found fantastic. He shared his podcast, which we'll talk about because it's amazing for engineers building pretty much anything. And it was just answering questions, having conversations, just super useful in the community, super helpful to everyone. And fast forward a couple of months, we wanted to start the SaaS community champions, community heroes, and really recognize and reward the people who are most helpful in the community, really sharing their knowledge, helping everyone out. And it was a no-brainer that Jeffery has been one of those superstars worthy of extra recognition. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Glenn. It's wonderful to be here. I found out about the community from Twitter. You were posting some great content and links on Twitter. This is, I think, back like on episode 1 or 2 of your newsletter. And I was like, oh, perfect. That is the thing that I've been looking for all this time, of where, what's the watering hole? Where do SaaS developers hang out? Because if you just try to find them on Twitter or anywhere else, it's like it's too diffuse. There's too many developers in general who are not, like, it's hard to find the people. So as soon as you said it, it's like, oh, this is perfect. This is where I want to be.
That's fantastic, because this is exactly why I started the community. I had all those questions around authentication, security, network, domains, like as I said, like scalability, like all those things, architecture questions. And I had no idea how to ask it of people who are building something similar, because if you ask people who are building a social network about scalability, they will have a very different ideas than what someone building an expense reporting SaaS application would have. So it's this is exactly why I started it. And when you said that you found out about the community from the newsletter, it brought in my mind the idea of a flywheel. If you're familiar with the concept from AWS, I think popularized it, that we started a community and then people started sharing. I took some of the things people shared and turned it into a newsletter. And you saw the newsletter, joined the community, now you're sharing, now you have been highlighted in the newsletter. And I think I shared your content in at least 3 or 4 different newsletters at this point. So it kind of causes this flywheel where more content causes more people to join the community, which creates even more good content for everyone, which causes even more people to join the community.
Right, virtuous cycle.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So, first of all, congratulations of being a SaaS Developer Hero, and thank you for everything you've done.
Oh, thank you, and I appreciate this nifty keyboard. It is super nice. It's clicky. When I explained to my wife that I was getting a keyboard with a heavy tactile feel, she's like, why would you want that? And then she's like, wait, actually, I would love that. And then she played with it for a minute. She's like, this thing would drive me nuts.
So I have my own clicky. I don't know if you can hear it in the recording. It's clicky, but I think reasonably clicky. My husband works in the other room and he does not complain about my extra clickiness.
Nice.
So when you started conversations in the community, I think one of the early things you shared is your never rewrite philosophy. So you're kind of like, I'm talking about scalability, iterations, a lot of software engineering concepts, and then you're like, you should never rewrite. and you said it's a core philosophy, never rewrite. You have a never rewrite podcast, which
Yes.
we will have in the show links so you can visit. What's the thing with never rewrite? I mean, we're rewriting all the time.
Yeah, so it's a hard thing to explain, and it all goes back to Joel Spadinsky in like 2001 or two, um, from Joel on Software. He has this, or it was at the time, a canonical article about how Netscape decided to do a full rewrite after Netscape 4, and they went dark for like a year and a half, 2 years, and i.e. Microsoft Internet Explorer ate their lunch, and that was it. The company was dead. Netscape died because they decided to do a full rewrite. So it's this classic piece now, and sort of I was a new developer at the time when that came out, and so I was like, oh, okay, and that kind of stuck with me, and I've seen it throughout my career. So my career's more than 20 years, so I'm on the older side of developers, and it's a repeating pattern of, oh, I'm going to. It's not that I'm going to rewrite it all, because you're always going to rewrite it all. It's I'm going to stop the current system. I'm going to create a new system that's going to be better in every way possible. And then I'm going to cut over, and then we're going to move on with the new system, and things will be cakes and pies. And it inevitably breaks down because you can't stop the old system long enough. It's not like, oh, I'm going to write the whole state to disk, and then I'm going to start the new system and read state off. It's the two things will actually co-evolve, and so you'll always be chasing the old system. And so if you decide, oh, I'm going to rewrite, I'm going to redo the system, you're inevitably asking for a disaster. But it's hard to explain because it's like, okay, but I'm still going to rewrite it. Like that was an early, somebody on the internet made the comment of, oh, never rewrite. What's the solution? Rewrite. So Isaac Askew, he's my co-host, we're playing with terminology to try and emphasize the difference between a rewrite and iteratively replacing things. And we're settling into a Ship of Theseus metaphor. Theseus, famously, he's the guy, he kills the Minotaur, saves the children of Athens, comes home on a ship, and then in honor of him, every year the Athenians take his ship out and take a pleasure cruise back to Crete or something. And then at some point it becomes a philosophical concept of, oh, well, they've been doing this for 300 years. Clearly the original wooden ship has rotted, right? And they've replaced, as it rots, they've done maintenance and they replaced it. And at some point, nothing that was there when Theseus was there is left, right? It's an entirely new ship. And so it's this philosophical question of, is this really Theseus' ship? And if so, how come? Because none of the wood's there. So we've taken the term, we're calling it Theseus ship, because you're going to iteratively ship your code until there's nothing left of the original. But you're never going to rewrite. And the golden difference is you always have a working ship. In a rewrite, you're saying, oh, this ship is old and decrepit. I'm going to build a new ship, and then we're going to use that one once it's ready. When you Theseus ship, you always have the one ship, and you're always trying to continue to use it.
Interesting. So yes. I wanted to ask you, a lot of times you get the opposite advice, especially when you're doing a startup. People say, build one to throw away. Build an MVP as fast as humanly possible. You're going to throw it all away anyway. Don't invest too much in it. Mm-hmm. Is it at odds with your never rewrite philosophy?
It depends on how you go about throwing it away. And so this is also kind of the practice that I'm trying to build in the developer community of, you're going to build, your early version of your SaaS, the one that you built to throw away, it's not going to scale, right? There's going to be things that are not performance, but you're going to find out what things are valuable to the customer. That you aren't going to, you shouldn't throw it away. Like many companies do make this mistake of, oh, well, this is the one to throw away. I'm going to throw this one away. I'm going to build a brand new one based off the things I've learned. and it'll be better and it'll work so much better. And I'm going to build this one. And what happens is it's not free. It's not like, oh, well, I spent 2 years building this one, model A, and my first iteration, and I got traction, and now customers are using it, and I'm getting hockey stick growth, and it's awesome. And now I'm going to rebuild the whole thing in 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Meanwhile, the original one, the one that you built to throw away, is crumbling. And if you don't maintain it, you won't make it. Your company will not make it long enough for the rewrite. But if you instead iteratively replace the one that you're going to throw away, then yes, for sure, you'll make, well, I don't know that you will make it, but it will continue to add value. It'll continue to grow with your company, and you've got a much better chance of making it.
So how do you suggest building the original in a way that will actually make it easier to throw pieces of it away over time as the company grows and evolves?
It's your standard answer for most developer problems of, well, it's got to have tests. It's got to have tests. You don't necessarily need to be test-driven development, but you need to know what this thing is doing. Because the flip side of that is, if you don't know what this thing is doing, you can't rewrite it. Right? Like, oh, well, I've got this thing, and then there's this 1,000-line function ball of mud, and I don't know what it's going to do, but I'm going to rebuild everything about it in the framework, and then I'm going to tackle this 1,000-line ball of mud at the end. It's like, no.
Yeah.
You're going to need to understand the 1,000-line ball of mud. You do it up front. Get the value from understanding what's going on, because it will make your maintenance work easier during that whole transition period if you must do a rewrite, because you're going to have to do it eventually anyway.
So I would say that you cannot really rewrite your way out of a lack of tests. You can rewrite your way out of other problems maybe, but not out of missing tests.
Right. If you don't, in a rewrite, you eventually have to test the thing, because otherwise you don't know that you're rewritten it.
Yes.
Like if you can't prove that the same inputs produce the same outputs, you're going to just have terrible bugs in production.
Yeah, that's a good point, because a lot of people start, again, startup mode, you start without any tests because, I'm building one to throw away. Why waste time? I don't even know if anyone will use it. Why spend time writing tests? But somewhere between, I don't know if anyone will use it, and, oh shit, people are using it, I have to rewrite. You kind of need to introduce tests somewhere in between.
Right. Or even when you're at the, I've succeeded. People are using it. Now I need to write tests, because now I need to maintain it.
Yeah, exactly that. Any other advice for writing code that is easier to maintain iteratively?
The standard program. I'm not an expert, but if you were to read the Pragmatic Programmer or any of the classic tomes, like, you'd want it to be loosely coupled. You want it to have modularity. I am ambivalent on the service versus monolith debate.
Aren't we all?
Many people are not. A well-built monolith works better than moderately well-built services, but a badly built monolith performs much worse than a cluster of badly built services. So it's one of those. Well, are you going to write good code? Tell me if you're going to write good code, and I'll tell you which way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that at the end of the day, it's a hard decision. That's why we cannot be here in the show and tell you always do a monolith or always do a microservices architecture, because either one. We have examples of extremely successful monoliths, and we have examples of extremely successful microservices, and we also have failure stories from both. So I don't think we can give this type of advice. But even if you build a monolith, the only way to make it iteratively replaceable is to make it loosely coupled monolith.
Right. If you've got a loosely coupled monolith, then if you have a truly loosely coupled monolith, you basically have a service architecture, because they're not impacting or having side effects on each other anyway.
Yeah. Do you have advice on actually when is the right time to move from loosely coupled monoliths to microservices?
I don't. I have started a few blog articles where I try to give that advice or try to come up with a framework for making that decision. And I haven't been able to come up with anything that looks like a sign. Well, from the code standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a code decision. I'm 100% with you.
The reasons that I have seen it done that have made sense is you want to experiment with multiple technologies, right? If you have a monolith, you have one technology stack. If you have services, you can change the stack of any service and it'll be fine. Well, I don't know if it'll be fine, but you can do an experiment. And so that's a thing of, oh, well, I need to do experiments. Culturally, when you get to the point where you have multiple teams or dozens of teams, this can become a cultural thing. At the place I'm at, we just switched from spaces from tabs to spaces. I don't know. I don't remember. I can't even. I don't care. But we agreed and we've switched the code linter. And I was like, okay, fine. I just loaded the new code linter, and I don't care, but people cared. This was a 4-year debate.
I'm so sorry.
It wasn't really a 4-year argument. It was just one of these. Nobody could gather enough momentum to get anybody to agree or changing the linter, and so it just wasn't in there, and so it was just inconsistent.
Yeah, no. So basically what you're saying is that if you have microservices, every team can decide for itself if they want tabs or spaces. That's the idea?
Right. Generally, that is also not a great reason to I hate to say conformity is extremely valuable inside a software shop, but conformity is extremely valuable. Non-conformity, uniqueness of expression is extremely, extremely, extremely expensive in software because it greatly reduces the number of people who can walk into a code base and understand it. It greatly increases your bust factor. It reduces the amount of code reuse that you're going to have because the patterns are going to be slightly different. So even if everybody on one team is reusing a pattern, the next team over has to implement the pattern themselves in their own way. I remember an argument I had many times at one place was guy would be arguing look, I want to build these sports cars. I want to have these services and I want them to be fast and super things. And you're building, we call them pickup trucks. This is a Ford F-150. It is boring. And you take whatever, that's the services is a Ford F-150. And you put your business logic in the flatbed back and off it goes. And he's like, I want to build a Ferrari and I want it to be special purpose and it's going to be fast. I'm like, okay, cool. But then you have to maintain every single part in that thing, right? If every service is an F-150 and all that's different is in the bed, it's whatever's in the bed in the back, then already 80-90% of the code, any developer on the floor can walk in and know where everything is and go straight to the problem. If one thing on the floor is a sports car, good luck.
Yeah, I think Tesla discovered it the hard way, that going from one successful model to 2 successful models is actually pretty hard on the factory floor. So I'm thinking about, I'll move away from the car analogy, but I don't know if you're familiar, there is the Google rule for introducing new languages. Are you familiar with that?
No.
You're allowed to have one new language per 5,000 developers is kind of the Google law, because that's the ratio in Google. As the company grew, every once in a while they had to introduce a new programming language, but they try to have a lot of developers working on this language. You cannot have one developer who's familiar with the language doing his own thing, because as you said, standardization, we are, even in startups, it's a company. I mean, you have more, the moment you have more than one developer, you need to have some level of agreement.
Well, as soon as you're a company, you need to have, because it's when you're, if you're doing something as a passion project, I mean, go nuts and do whatever you want, whatever is fun. but as soon as you're a company, right, you've actually got a goal, and the goal is to service your clients or your customers or what have you. Like you're writing software for a purpose, and the purpose of your software is not to be interesting software. As much as it pains me sometimes.
Yeah, and that actually brings us to a good question, because there is a lot of debate about decisions in software, how much should be at the level of the person closest to the code, like at the team level, versus from higher ups deciding, hey guys, this is our tech stack, like it or not, this is how we're doing things in this company. Go ahead and live with it. As you said, like if a CTO comes over and says, hey, we are building F-150 trucks, this is what you're building. I don't care that you want to build a sports car. This is not a company that is building a sports car. What's your take on that? Like, how do decisions from the top, or could decisions be done lower level but still get standardized across the entire company?
I would like to say yes, they could, but I have never seen it. Which is bad, because I've never seen from bottom up consensus building at that level. It seems like the developers always are trying to pull apart, to the company's detriment, maybe to the individual's good or bad. But there's, like at the place I am now, Active Campaign, there's a fairly standard API layer, and then there's also the GraphQL group. Like, oh, no, we should be doing GraphQL. And I'm neither here nor there on GraphQL versus API, but just I am against the GraphQL group because we've already got so much API. And it's like, oh, well, if we start moving heavy on the GraphQL stuff, now we're bifurcating, we're splitting our efforts. But it's a very valid thing. Like GraphQL is a totally valid choice. And so I feel like I wish there was a way for developers to get consensus and bring it up, instead of eventually needing the leadership to say, okay, we've made a choice, push down. Because I don't like leadership pushing down. I'm very much...
Nobody likes it, right? I think leadership themselves usually don't really like it. They would prefer that all developers would figure out whether they want tabs or spaces and get on with it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question for you, slightly different tack. A lot of the advice you give here is it applies to anything, no matter if I'm building iPhone applications, I'm building social media, I'm building on-prem software, if anyone is still doing it. It's really super generic engineering advice. Like, it's good. It's like the foundations that everything is built on, but it applies to everything. Do you have any, from your experience, any specific advice for people who are deliberately building software as a service that you think is kind of unique, that other people maybe shouldn't be doing things in that way?
I'm trying to think. I think collecting a number of SaaS, mostly SaaS anti-patterns, but that's not advice you should take. It's advice you should avoid.
What not to do is sometimes even better advice. So by all means, share that.
The first one that comes to mind is the pattern that I call the drop doom. Basically, when you're dealing with customer provided data, customer built data, which pretty much any SaaS will, a common thing is, oh, well, I have custom fields. So you have some kind of custom field system to allow people to add their own data to your CRM or platform. And a common one is, oh, well, that's going to be like a drop down or a list or something. And you just let them, okay, they can add as many as they want. Eventually, because customers are not programmers, they don't think about things like Big O and all this stuff, they're going to put too much data in a dropdown. And too much data is like 1,000. That's around when your browser is really going to start grinding to a halt. But like I saw one hilarious example. A customer had sent out an email with a drop down of, what is your favorite European city? And they had put in the top the 10,000 largest European cities.
10,000.
So it was a drop down with 10,000 elements. And this is and the emails had gone out, and then they were upset that customers were upset with them because they were sending these emails that just caused their computers to grind to a halt. It's like, well, yes, you can't put 10,000 elements in a dropdown.
You know what? Even if you could, let's say that browsers were magically supporting it, what human wants to look at a list of 10,000 things to make a choice?
Yeah, no, I mean, I assume they're alphabetical, but I don't know.
I mean, my favorite city is Rome. This is a lot of scrolling.
Yeah, I have no idea how many cities similarly named to Rome. And Lord help them if they had the translation on, and so they were doing, in English and Spanish and German versions of all that data.
Oh, this is actually very good advice in itself. If your SaaS company wants to sell in the European market, people care about the languages used.
Yes. So yeah, the drop doom, which is basically allowing binding any user interface display elements to an unbounded user-generated list, which is not pithy, but you call it a drop doom and it'll stick in people's heads. Like, oh yeah, you allow customers to have an open-ended list. It's going to be bad.
Yes.
But I guess going for things that you should almost certainly do if you're writing SaaS, almost certainly multi-tenant from the get-go. You should have a reason not to be multi-tenant. It shouldn't be, oh, well, I'm going to be single tenant and then I'll figure it out. It's, be multi-tenant from the get-go, or have a very good reason, like, I don't know, medical. In which case you need to have a very good plan for standing up lots and lots of your stacks. Be multi-lingual or internationalized right from the get-go. This isn't that hard. Just wrap all your strings in a converter function. Even if that converter function in iteration 1 through in the first 2 years does nothing but return the original string, you'll be very glad you did this later on when you don't have to go back and wrap all your strings in your system so that your language converter can convert them. Just wrap them in a dummy function and move along.
So I'll give you one of mine.
Yeah.
Tell me if in your experience it's actually works or not. Be API first. Like even if you're building an expense reporting app and your customers are accountants and they will never use the APIs, you should still have the architecture API first, not the whole thing. Like, don't do it with the PHP thing where you basically just serve HTML. And the reason is that sooner or later, usually sooner these days, someone will ask, but how do I integrate your thing with these other things that I already have? Does it integrate with Salesforce, HubSpot, Zendesk, Zenefits, like whatever it is out there? And the answer should be, yes, of course we integrate. Here's our APIs.
I'll go you even so I don't even consider that SaaS specific advice. That's pretty much if you're writing software, whether it's in-house or external or what have you, it should be API driven. And the reason for that is if you flip it around, okay, you have something that's only UI driven. Cool. Now you have to write some tests, which means you're bringing in something like Selenium or God knows what, and you now have these super brittle tests based on page layout. Whereas if everything is API first, you can then write something that's going to hit, an integration test is going to hit your API, confirm that the thing happened, and it allows you to build a data generator. One SaaS specific thing that I see a lot is, oh, well, we have a staged environment, or developers will work locally, and they will create a branch and they'll set up like 2 or 3 elements of whatever it is they're working on, and it'll look good and they'll ship it. And lo and behold, you've mixed up your IDs, right? You somehow crossed some IDs from your tables, but because all the IDs were 1 and 2, you didn't notice. Suddenly, when the IDs get into the very quickly in production, people will notice because the IDs don't make any sense. But those are the kinds of things that will happen if you do minimal data testing. And if you don't have API first, you won't be able to write tools. You'll build your data for your testing manually, which means you build minimal amounts of it. That I've seen quite a lot where it will bite people. Like, oh, I didn't know this thing would bog down if it had 1,000 elements. I only made like 5.
Yeah, makes sense. We are pretty much at time, and that was sage advice to finish with. So
Okay.
Unless there is something that you actually wanted to talk about and I forgot to ask.
No, I'm super excited by the community that you built. It's sort of my developer superpower, as it were. It's not that I'm a great developer. It's that I'm very good at problem decomposition. And I'm making a pitch here for my own services. So that I'm not even selling. I just want to do it live. Bring me your problems and I can help you decompose them. It is, you will be amazed if you come to me with a problem of like, oh, well, we must rewrite this thing. There's no other way. I guarantee you that with an hour-long conversation, I can find you an alternative that will have you delivering value to your customers the whole way through. You can just come on the Never Rewrite podcast and we can talk about it.
My bet is that nobody is going to take you on it.
Yes.
And the reason is that the people who think there is no choice other than rewrite, they actually want to rewrite. And they don't want someone to come in and tell them not to rewrite. It's usually like you may get managers whose developer told them that they absolutely have to rewrite and they may want a second opinion. But developers who really want to rewrite, I don't think they will want anyone to tell them that they don't have to. They secretly kind of know that they don't have to.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that actually explains a lot of my marketing problem right there. Sort of I have the theory that if I can get somebody on the show, then I can do it with them once live and people see it, they will see that it's valuable because it's too squishy to kind of get people to understand what I'm going for. But if I could do it live or with somebody and record it, but the light bulb would go off. But I think you might be right that the people who want to do a rewrite don't want somebody to tell them why they're wrong.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for all your great advice in the past and hopefully into the future.
Thank you, Gwen. Yeah, I look forward to interacting more with the community and to anybody else who wants to get in contact with me. Thank you for the opportunity to come on your show.